The United Kingdom, the United States and Japan continue their meetings, and today the host, Emmanuel Macron, also made that table bigger because he invited leaders from the Arab world, Latin America. President Lula was here this morning, Asia and Africa. That is a message from the G7 that the world can no longer be run by 7 countries, and it also fits into a push by the European Union and the Europeans over the past year to reach out to the world, and that thirst, that hunger to cut trade deals from Latin America to Asia. That is for today. But the 2 big themes that continue to be on everyone's minds is Ukraine and Iran. This morning, President Volodymyr Zelensky joined G7 leaders. At this point, we are waiting to see whether or not a bilateral meeting between Zelensky and the president of the U.S. will still go ahead. The Ukrainians have a double message for the Americans. One is to say that the narrative and the dynamics on the battlefield have changed in favor of Ukraine, and the other is to say that this is a time to increase the pressure on Russia and Vladimir Putin through sanctions. And in fact, the president of the U.S. was asked this morning flat out whether he would reinstate sanctions on Russian energy. Let's take a look.
Well, soon we'll be able to do that because the oil is now flowing. So we took sanctions off because obviously we're not looking to impede the oil. So we're in a position to do that soon.
And that is the president of the U.S. making a very clear connection between the war in Iran and the war in Ukraine. Remember, the U.S. lifted some sanctions on Russian oil because the oil coming out of the Gulf was blocked as a result of the Strait of Hormuz and the war. Now, the president of the U.S. doubled down today, insisted and reiterated that the Strait of Hormuz will open on Friday. It will do so freely. There will be freedom of navigation and no payments to Iran as a result of this framework deal that he's cut with Tehran. Let's take a look.
Good things are happening. The ships are starting to move now. We're going to have it fully open by Friday. The Strait is going to be open toll-free. And it's toll-free beyond the 60 days. It's not, somebody said, oh, it's toll-free for... No. It's toll-free, period. When it opens permanently, it'll be toll-free.
It will open on Friday, and it will open unconditionally also on Friday. Now we know that Lucerne in Switzerland will hold that ceremony between representatives of the U.S. and the Vice President of the U.S. and Tehran to formalize this agreement. Still, that text has not been released. The fine print of the deal is still not clear. President Trump said that he will release it in this next few days, but there is still no timing on it. And the Europeans have plenty of questions in terms, again, of the details of this deal. And remember, yesterday when we spoke to John Bolton here on Euronews, he told us that this was a bad deal because if it was a good deal, they would have released the document already. Now, on that note, let's go to our reporter, Angela Skujins. She has been following the G7 leaders during the entire day. Angela, there's been a lot of focus on the Middle East, and in particular, some very striking comments when it comes to President Trump and Netanyahu, given the situation in Lebanon. Tell us more.
Good evening, Maria. So certainly warning shots were fired by Trump following a bilateral between him and Qatar's Al Thani, a key mediator in those crucial US-Iran peace talks that could occur as early as Friday. Now, Trump warned that the role, he was asked by a journalist about the role that Israel plays and whether Israel could be a hurdle to the stability as well as the peace in the region. He did warn that Benjamin Netanyahu needs to be responsible when it comes to the conflict, and that Syria perhaps could play a stronger role rooting out Hezbollah. Of course, they're referring to the Lebanese militia. He also stated that there needed to be less perhaps gratuitous violence, referring to a strike on Beirut on Sunday that led to dozens of people injured as well as at least 3 people killed. But let's take a listen from the man himself at this press conference.
I'll tell you what, Israel's fighting Hezbollah too long and too many people are being killed. And you don't have to knock down an apartment house every time you're looking for somebody, because there are a lot of people in those apartment houses, and they're not all Hezbollah, that I can tell you. And I suggested to Israel to let Syria take care of Hezbollah. Because to be honest with you, I think they do a better job of doing it.
US President Donald Trump speaking there on the second day of the G7 summit in Évian, taking a noticeably measured tone when it comes to updates regarding that ceasefire accord that could be finalised in Switzerland. He's sending his 2IC, JD Vance, to finalise that agreement with his Iranian counterpart. But the Europeans are up in arms. They want answers regarding the details of this deal, whether they will have unimpeded access to the Strait of Hormuz, which has been garroted by the conflict, sending the energy market into chaos. But hopefully we will have some answers as early as Friday. Maria.
Yes, and those extraordinary comments, you don't have to knock out an entire apartment building to deal with Hezbollah. President of the U.S. saying Syria is better at dealing with Hezbollah. That in diplomatic terms is a massive warning to Benjamin Netanyahu that he now needs to play ball. And Angela, just as a final point on this, there's been a lot of speculation throughout the day as to whether or not a face-to-face meeting between President Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky will take place. We know they met briefly, but what about this bilateral? What do we know?
Of course, so, Maria, there are many things officially on the agenda, but we also know that Donald Trump moves to the beat of his own drum, and potentially there could be a bilateral scheduled for later today, but nothing, of course, is official. We did see pictures emerge earlier this morning following a working session on Ukraine with US President Donald Trump appearing to listen to the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, the duo flanked by the US top diplomat Marco Rubio and another key person here, Rustem Umerov, a key negotiator when it comes to Ukraine, finalising potentially an end to this ongoing war with Russia. We don't know the exact details of what occurred during these talks, but Zelensky spoke to the press after and stated that only Trump can bring Putin to the negotiating table, and hopefully this will occur before winter. As we know, the Kremlin is brutal when it comes to those energy infrastructure attacks, which send Ukrainians to sub-zero temperatures, certainly feeling the bite by winter. Maria.
And of course, winter is the most difficult time for Ukraine because the energy infrastructure has been decimated as a result of the war. Angela, thank you for that very comprehensive analysis. Let's cross over now to Kyiv because we are joined by Ukraine's former Prime Minister, Arseniy Yatsenyuk, who is joining us from Ukraine. Sir, at this point, there's a lot of speculation as to whether or not this G7 can help talks between Ukraine and Russia. Is it going to help talks?
Oh, thanks for having me, Maria. You know, frankly, the optics of G7 is much better than expected. And the mood in both China and Beijing, and Moscow, because they are strong and strategic partners, is not buoyant and not perfect one. And the reason is very clear. On the one hand, we have a meeting of allies or frenemies. But that's not what Putin and Xi expected. He expected some kind of brawl or spat or infight between G7 members and those who have been invited by President Macron. But we see quite cooperative mood on the one hand. On the other hand, we as Ukrainians have to examine what kind of trump cards we have in our hands. You're well aware of this famous expression of President Trump. Cards we have. So we have your word, which is of crucial importance. I can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, but help me understand one thing. At this point, the president of Ukraine was very clear. The talks with Russia need to happen. They need to get moving, and they need to happen before the winter. Does that mean that if there are no talks with Vladimir Putin this year, the war inevitably continues into 2027?
Have you heard what designated war criminal Putin told to President Trump when he congratulated him with his birthday? He said that he is ready to meet my president in Moscow. So it's a clear sign that Putin is not eager to hold any kind of talks. And let me reiterate once again, it was a KGB special operation. He wasn't doing any kind of real talks. It was the way how to drag our feet into never-ending talks. But what is happening right now for Putin? Putin has to realize that we still have a kind of unity among G7 member states. And despite the fact that President Trump says that it isn't his war, the majority of Americans believe, 70% of Americans believe, that the US have to support the Ukraine. So actually, what kind of trump cards we have? The first, we have Europeans. The second one, we have strong military support. The third one, we have sanctions in place. And the most important issue, whether we have President Trump as a trump card. And I still try to find out whether President Trump will press like hell on war criminal Putin, because it's in the interest of the United States to stop this war.
But let me pick up on that point. But I gotta. Okay, but I gotta pick up to that point. Up until now, President Trump made it clear that his focus was on the Middle East. What makes you believe, what makes you confident that President Trump cares, if at all, about the future of Ukraine? Because up until now, we've seen less weapons and less money. What makes you believe he is on your side?
Well, in politics, it's better not just to believe, but in politics, it's better to figure out what kind of interest President Trump has. He wants to win the midterms, crystal clear. I believe that he wants to defend the national security interests of the United States. True. So, and the American people, overwhelmingly, they support the Ukrainian people. So, it's a kind of trio. And Iran is no longer a most important issue for the U.S. administration, as of now, as we expect to sign MOU between the U.S. and Iran. So it means that Ukraine is back in the spotlight. And President Trump said that it's not his war. But I've heard similar quotes from President Woodrow Wilson and FDR before the First and the Second World War. But in the end, Americans did their best to save the humanity. So it brings personal interest of President Trump to help Ukraine.
Okay, we'll see whether or not this meeting does happen, because some would indicate if there is no bilateral, that would also indicate that the U.S. perhaps is not as interested in dealing with President Zelensky directly. Do you believe this is a relationship that can heal? And let's say there is no bilateral. Can Ukraine objectively, truth to God, continue this war with just the support of the Europeans?
Well, Ukraine is fighting like hell, and we actually defending our sovereign soil, and we even managed to claw back a number of Ukrainian territories. So Europeans provided an overwhelming support to Ukraine. But we desperately need Americans, and I want to send a crystal clear signal to the President of the US and to the US administration. We can win this war, and we will win this war in case if we'll stand together with Americans shoulder to shoulder.
Okay, but on that point, I've got to ask you now about the Europeans, because President Zelensky repeated today that he does want to see Ukraine joining the European Union in a fast track. You know very well the Europeans do not agree with this. Why are you still pushing for fast track accession to the European Union? And what does a new method of joining the European Union mean to you?
Look, in the realpolitik, it's quite
Tell me about it.
insurmountable. In realpolitik, it's practically insurmountable task to join the European Union on a fast track, on the one hand. But on the other hand, that was practically impossible even to imagine a few years ago that Ukraine will be granted an access to the European Union and the Ukrainians will start negotiations, accession negotiations with the European Union. So here is the thing. We as Ukrainians have to do our best in order to implement an action plan to make Ukraine a full-fledged member of the European Union. And in the future, it will be up to the Europeans and to their own sovereign decisions to accept or not to accept Ukraine. So my message is as follows. We as Ukrainians will do everything. You as Europeans are interested in having Ukraine inside rather than outside to make the Union stronger and better. So it's a kind of two-way street.
Well, Well, sir, thank you for that. Thank you for joining us on Euronews. On that note, today we did hear from the president of Ukraine in a hot mic saying that he will be in Brussels on Thursday to show, again, the opening of now formal negotiations, given that Hungary has dropped its veto. The president of Ukraine, and I keep checking my phone, do forgive me, but we are waiting to see whether or not this bilateral meeting with President Trump does take place. There had been speculation that it could happen at around 6 p.m., 7 p.m., but it's now pushing later than that. I do want to go back to Angela now for a final check. Angela, of course, we are waiting to see whether or not this bilateral does take place. We know that the Ukrainians want this meeting to go ahead, but they have not confirmed it as it stands. But before we get to that, I do want to ask you about another major theme that is playing out in this G7, and that is technology and artificial intelligence. Because tomorrow we will see the executives, the leaders, the tech titans from some of the biggest companies when it comes to artificial intelligence gather here with G7. Names going from OpenAI to Anthropic and Mistral. Tell me about that meeting. What's it about and who is going to be at it?
Yes, Maria, so arguably the 21st century's most important technological advancement, artificial intelligence, is very much the centre of the final day of G7 crunch time talks. Those leaders, those CEOs, as you rightly pointed out, will be attending a working session titled Ensuring a Safe, Rapid and Effective Deployment of Artificial Intelligence. It comes as Trump slapped export controls last week on Anthropic, lighting a fire under European leaders, proving that they need to get cracking when it comes to developing their own AI capabilities so they're less reliant on their transatlantic ally. But as you rightly pointed out at the beginning of this, I've been frantically checking my phone to see if we've received an update regarding that bilateral, but nothing coming through from my sources regarding a potential meeting between Zelensky and Trump.
Not yet, but we do hear an helicopter, so that means that with this helicopter, the leaders are on the move. And to your point, of course, technology, that is the next frontier. Some would argue at this point the U.S. would be prepared to weaponize pretty much everything from the dollar to debt to now artificial intelligence to get ahead. And the Europeans are going to have to really wake up. And Angela, of course, these are very serious themes, but it's the G7, so sometimes we do get some light moments. And today, a lot of hot mics. Tell me about it.
Yes, so there's been moments of pure G7 gold here. It started with the hot mics from Zelensky outlining his potential travel plans to Brussels, stating that he would be in the Belgian capital on the 18th. We know that the European Council will kick off on Thursday with discussion of Ukraine firmly on the menu. The lighter moments that you mentioned, it started with German Chancellor Friedrich Merz gifting Trump a jersey from the German football team to commemorate and celebrate his upcoming 80th birthday, as well as the kickoff of the FIFA World Cup. But those hot mics just seem to be plaguing our European leaders. Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, infamous for being photographed toting tailored cigarettes, announced to her European contemporaries that as of a month ago, she has been off the cigarettes. Let's take a listen to that exchange.
Had a cigarette life. No. No. Georgia. When? No. Last night.
Good. Coffee, a lot of problems in the morning, and a cigarette, that may be a day in the office for many. But the good thing is she says it right there. She's quit smoking. Those are some of the funny moments that come into play with hot mics playing out throughout the day on a number of occasions with the leaders. Of course, we are still monitoring this day 2 of the G7. You can continue to follow the latest on Euronews.com and all of our platforms. We will bring you the latest if that meeting between the president of Ukraine and the president of the U.S. does go ahead, and we will be back with the highlights and the recap tomorrow in Europe Today at 8 a.m. and our final special report from the final day of the G7 here in Évian with the communique, if indeed we do get one, and the final results from the summit, which will be the final one with Emmanuel Macron as president of France, given that election in 2027 in France. On that note, thank you so much for joining us. As always, it's a pleasure, and have a great night.
And discoveries, A world of opportunities,
of colours,
of hope,
of ideas,
of sounds.
Discover a world of inspiring stories.
I see music as a way to change the world.
Created by Euronews' finest storytellers.
I'm in the heights of Gabalat.
Telling stories of people of our world.
Where little stories can make history.
Our world is unique.
So are the Euronews original series.
I targeted just to live my dreams and follow my passion.
Stream online at euronews.com and on the Euronews mobile app.
Hello and welcome to the Cube Euronews' fact-checking show. After years of negotiations and debate among EU member states, a major reform of the European Union's migration rules came into force last week. The new pact aims to strengthen border procedures and overhaul the EU's asylum system. But some politicians from France's far-right National Rally have challenged one of its key measures. They claim that the reform will allow the EU to impose a €20,000 fine on member states that refuse to accept migrants on their territory. The National Rally's Marine Le Pen wrote on X that the migration